won't be doing any debate tonight, any motions. If you have any questions directly on the presentation, certainly we'll entertain those. But this is also a good opportunity to look for opportunities that you may need some more information, take some time over the next little bit to get back to staff. And obviously we're going through the public open houses, so I'd encourage everyone that can to get out to those as well. So we'll start this evening with a short video. So I'll move over to Steve there.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So this video is just a quick 3-minute video on how property assessment and taxation works.
Okay, I want to explain to you how your property taxes are calculated based on how much your home is worth. Imagine there's a municipality that only has 3 homes, and they're each worth a different amount. The total cost to provide all of their municipal services is $1,000. This is collected through property taxes. Each homeowner pays property taxes based on how much their home is worth. So, the value of all the homes are added up and divided by the municipality's cost, which gives us the tax rate. This tax rate is applied to all the houses to get enough money to pay for all of the services. So, each homeowner pays according to how much their house is worth. Every 4 years, the houses are reassessed. Let's say all 3 properties have gone up equally in value. If we go back to our calculation, the total cost of services hasn't changed, but the total property value has increased. When this happens, there will be a decrease in the tax rate. Now, when we apply that new rate on all the homes, everyone still pays the same. 1. Property taxes are based on what a home is worth. If reassessments all increase equally, then everyone pays the same taxes as before. Now, let's say another 4 years has gone by, and these homes are reassessed. During this time, the house on the right became more valuable in the market than the other 2. Okay, so, time for a little more math. The total value of all the homes have increased, which means the municipality has to calculate a new tax rate. With this new tax rate, the first 2 homes will actually pay less than the home on the right that was reassessed at a higher value. Since the cost of services hasn't changed, the municipality doesn't need to collect more property taxes. However, since property taxes are based on a home's value, those taxes could potentially go up or down based on the rest of the homes. So, what happens when the cost to provide services goes up? Well, it means more property taxes need to be collected from every home, and a new tax rate is calculated. To get the new rate, we take that amount that the municipality now needs and divide it by all of the property values. The new rate is applied to all the homes, and now everyone has to pay the new tax amount to continue to fund all of the services. So, let's review. 1. Property taxes are based on the value of a home. When homes are reassessed equally, each homeowner will pay the same amount proportionately as before. 2. When homes are reassessed at different values, each homeowner will pay a different amount proportionately based on how much their home increased in value. 3. When the municipality's cost to provide services increases, a property tax increase, then everyone pays their share proportionately across the board. And that explains the relationship between property value and property taxes.
And now we'll jump into the budget presentation, and we'll start with Don.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to share with Council and those in the audience and watching from home some budget highlights and how we got to the position we did, and then we'll be drilling down into more detail to provide additional information. So over the past 4 years, Council has supported a budget direction related to our inflation or our CPI percentage on the operating budget, and a percentage consistent with the current approvals to meet our asset management plan. Administration is presenting a budget for Council's consideration that will start at 4.99%, and it's comprised of the following amounts. 1.49% is a direct result of the provincial government downloading a tax transfer on property taxes. So of that 4.99%, 1.49. 1% increase is the total funding that we have for our infrastructure, our asset management plan. Last year, Council elected to add an additional $550,000 for the storm sewers over a 4-year period. So this is the second year of 4. We also made a commitment to address some of our flooding issues. We received senior government funding of a $40 million total, of which 60% was our responsibility, and the recommendation is to add $517,000 to this year's base budget to try and account for a portion of that funding that we're obligated to provide to match the $16.5 million we received from the federal government. Other council's previous decisions and requisitioning bodies will also make up the balance of their request. So we have certain groups that provide services for us, like Chatham-Kent Police Services and our conservation authorities. Their budgets are also going to be included as part of the consultations. So you see on the slide that we have an infrastructure tax levy of 2.74%. That's being composed of the following pieces. A 1% asset management plan, that's our 20-year plan to fund the replacement or continued operation of all of our physical assets. 0.33%, that's the storm sewer funding of the $550,000 I spoke to a moment ago. And a 0.33% disaster management and adaptation fund, that's the money we'd be using to do flood mitigation. So 1.08% inflation on the current asset management plan categories is also included. So in addition to the municipal and infrastructure levies, Chatham-Kent is required to deal with the provincial transfer income to property taxes totaling an additional 1.49%. And those are things that we did not have control over. That was a direct download from the province. Council has set in place a strategic plan. So the effort by administration is to make sure that any budget presented to Council is a direct reflection of Council's strategic focus and the term priorities for Council. So you can see that the plan is made up of 4 areas, and for the benefit of those at home, we have economic prosperity, health and safe communities, people and culture, and environmental sustainability. Those are the 4 areas of strategic focus. We also have, on the next slide, we also have 3 other critical success factors, and these are particularly important to consider at budget time. We want to make sure that the municipality continues to be financially sustainable, and that as was reported on Monday night, we're getting some very strong indicators that we're on the right track for maintaining financial sustainability in a good financial position. Open, transparent, and effective governance. The budget process is a good example of that. We are trying to be as transparent as possible as to how taxpayers' dollars are invested, and be open to questions as part of our public consultation process. I think another portion that we spend a little bit of time considering, I think is particularly important at this time, is the concept about resiliency. And, those of us who have, lived for a number of years in Chatham-Kent understand that over the past couple of years, we've suffered from an increased level of flooding. There's been some major issues impacting our community, erosion, flooding, both in our river systems and our lakefronts. And our ability to respond and to keep people safe or to provide appropriate support is a direct result of how much our capacity we have in resiliency. So things like having our reserves in place so that if we are called upon to respond and it's not an expected budgeted expense, we have some balance in our reserves that we can do so. And so it's always important at times when there's good times that we put a little bit of extra money available in our reserves so that we can pay attention to that. We've been doing that for a number of years with for example, our winter control budget, so that when we have a good year, we balance up and we're prepared for the bad years that might come in the following years. But flooding is probably a very good example of people to consider for why we're dealing with resiliency. Council, at the beginning of their term in this last spring, had gone to considerable length to consider what are their priorities for this term of Council. And any of the additional funds that are being considered in the budget are a direct result of trying to support Council in achieving their key priorities that they believe are essential for achieving our long-term and short and mid-term goals for this community and keeping things in the right balance. And these are the priorities that Council has established, so those will be available for people as a reference. So whenever we consider those factors, there's sometimes some challenges, but I also think it's important to consider what proactive steps that the community and through the leadership of council can take. With respect to our low to moderate assessment growth, council has started discussions on how we can invest in economic development and try and grow our community. There's the best case scenarios if we can create a situation where we increase our assessment growth, and that increased assessment growth can pay for any of the increased cost of our services, and that way we can keep taxes as low as possible, and possibly even to decrease taxes if we do a good job on assessment growth. Low population density is something also Chatham-Kent struggles with. So attempts to do resident attraction and retention and trying to get a population base here that can also share on the tax burden is also something that's particularly important. And we've been working on that for some time. And as has been reported in council chambers throughout the year, there's indications that our previously negative growth in population. We'd actually lost some population. That trend is now reversed, and we're seeing a very modest growth, and that's a good indicator, but I think we're wanting to be more aggressive on that front and do more to do attracting and retaining our citizens. And then significant infrastructure assets. We have been working for some time on an asset management plan. The community owns over $4 billion worth of physical assets. And for those assets to be maintained over time, we need to do a good job managing those assets, and that means investing in their long-term maintenance. So we believe those are the critical pieces in terms of balancing out some of our priorities. That's also, it's an important piece that the provincial government is now holding local communities accountable for maintaining an asset management plan. And as a result of our good stewardship and through council's directions, and administration support, we've been able to now achieve several $1 million of support from the provincial government to help support our additional efforts to maintain our assets. And that's sometimes millions of dollars to replace a bridge or to do a road work and so on. So there's many different factors for doing that. One's just good management, but the other is we're more eligible for other funds. I'd like to transfer our discussion for a minute for some staffing recommendations. This is particularly sensitive, and we want to make sure that that's tabled on the first night of council. Anytime we consider any sort of long-term changes to our staffing levels that has a potential to affect taxes, and we want to be upfront about where those are, and then we'll be dealing with those in more detail throughout our discussions. Under community wellness, there are 3 positions related to a dental program. During the past year, the provincial government passed legislation to start a dental program. It's mandatory. The good news from the taxpayer's perspective is 100% of those costs will be picked up by the provincial government, so that's not going to be impacting our discussions tonight. We have also a manager of drainage services. We have the most extensive drainage system in the province of Ontario. There's over 4,000 kilometers of drains. It's essential to support our farming industry. So we believe that there needs to be some additional supervision in that area to maintain that. And Mr. Kelly and his team have actually been able to look for funding efficiencies and reallocation of funds. So they believe that they're not asking for additional funding for that, but they are asking for the position. And they've been able to find ways to transfer funds to be able to cover that. There are 2 positions, an HR generalist and a business solution analyst from Capital Asset Management. To support our ongoing operations. Those were considered last year and approved by Council for supplemental funding. We believe the services that those positions support are still required, so we're coming back to Council to request additional funding for those. And there are 2 additional positions, Manager of Engineering Services and Engineering Technologists, that are being requested to support increase levels of activity in the infrastructure and engineering services, and we believe those are in direct support of Council's strategic priorities. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Gord, and he'll walk us through some additional details. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Gord Quinton, the Chief Financial Officer of the Municipality of Chatham-Kent, and I'll take you through the next few slides. Here's a proposed agenda, and we're going to be talking about, I have a few slides in each of these sections as we go through. So for a budget overview, just quickly recapping what we've stated, council has directed us to bring a budget with inflation plus what we need for our asset management plan. And that is exactly what our plan was to do all along. So that would have been ideally coming in at around 3.5, 3.6%. It was, but then along came the provincial transfer to property taxpayers. And I say it's as a, it's a, it can, there's different wording that can be used. It can be a download, but bottom line is it was, the province was elected to look after a deficit situation. They have chosen to transfer from income taxpayers to property tax owners a 1.49% tax increase. And it seems like this might be the worst of it has happened, and for the rest of your term, I'm not expecting a lot more to happen, but it is it's a one-time thing that we have to deal with, and in that transfer happening, I don't think there was any expectations that you would slash and cut services to make up for that provincial decision. As stated before, we're starting to address the disaster mitigation and adaptation fund, but this will have to be this will be a lot of work over the next couple of years to get the plan going. There were a little bit of funding left over from some drainage slope stabilization projects along the Thames River that were available to help this year, but just putting it out there that there will be need to be continued increase dollars put towards this to meet our obligations under that plan. And once again, we have our 2017 asset management plan. It is now a part of the provincial documents, and we're committed to our 1% a year. And in addition to that, we had what council decided last year to add $550,000 each year of this term of council. So there's been a few previous decisions affecting 2020. You'll hear about the first one for a couple more years. In 2013, the council of the day made a budget cut of $500,000 out of the winter control budget, specifically for salt materials, but also directed administration to purchase the same amount of salt as the previous year. There was no cut in the level of service, just we're not paying for it. That, of course, has set up Thomas's public works area to have a continued deficit automatically every year. We have attempted a few times to get this budget reinstated. With last year's budget, we decided let's put this $500,000, spread it over 4 years, and you did approve that first $125,000 last year. So we're continuing that process. The animal shelter was built, and we simply have the new life cycle, the capital maintenance budget to be added for that. We have the storm sewer decision that's for each year of this term of council. We have the minor item on broadcasting the entire budget, live streaming and having it available on Your TV. We thank our partners at Your TV for being agreeable to come to each day of the budget committee meeting deliberations to broadcast that, and the disaster mitigations fund. So overall, that's a 0.79% or $1,222,000 that we need to right off the bat come up with the decisions that we've already made. And in case somebody's looking for it, we just put a note here that physician recruitment, if you remember, the council has endorsed putting $100,000 for physician recruitment annually. However, the report was in the fall and they hadn't used the 2019 budget money, so they're using that in 2020. So there's not an ask for new money until 2021 here. So just letting you know that that's coming in the future years. This slide has way too much detail for someone just reading on the screen, but it's in your binders for your information. The overall is just to show that the work that's been done over the last 6 months in the budget process, of all the requests that came in, we were close to 12% tax impact, and through weeks and weeks of meetings and prioritizations and finding out alternate solutions is where we landed on the 4.99% that we're recommending to you tonight. In the first slide, that when Don talked about the municipal levy of 0.76%, this slide I've just broken that out into two areas to show, because we often get asked, well, what was our status quo budget? Well, our status quo budget was actually a cut in the budget of 0.04%. So our operations and access, and along with the new assessment growth, which helps cover the cost of inflation, we were able to basically stay status quo at zero. We then have lots of new items in this budget to support the things that Council has identified in their 2018 to 2022 goals. And we'll get into the details over the next few weeks as we go through the binders. But for example, there's money for social housing, a lot of fire equipment that was in need of repair, lifeguards, wage issues to be able to find lifeguards to run our outdoor pools in the summer. There's lots of great things in here that are new items supporting your goals. We then have the infrastructure levy that we've have talked about extensively, and the provincial transfer. So it's a difficult budget in that we're at 4.99%. There will be options over the next few weeks for us to try to get that down some more. But the key message is this council is investing in infrastructure, which is often the highest number of complaints that we hear are about the roads, about the storm sewers, things that need to be fixed. We have items supporting your goals, and we had this one-time transfer from the province that has that hopefully doesn't put us off track of attaining those goals. This breaks it down to the average household with the numbers that were in the BMA study this week of where these values come from. The 4.99% increase will represent a $144 increase on an average household. Keep in mind just the provincial download was $43 of that. So, and we've also added a new column this year to put it the impact per $100,000 assessment. That way, it makes it easy for people to just, if they know what their assessment is, times it by the 100,000, do some quicker math of getting to what that is. So it's $84 per $100,000 of assessment. If you remember to our climate change discussions and the original motion that came to council that was approved, one of the parts of the motion was that there'd be a climate lens put on the 2020 budget. So the goal, of course, is to identify opportunities to reduce emissions, enhance resilience to climate change through the budget development and review process. We're just in the beginning stages of that process. Gabriel Clark has come to you a couple times in the fall. And so he'll be coming to our January 28th first deliberations with a little bit more information. But really, you're still in the beginning works of that process where you're developing, well, what are your goals? What do you want to do? And so it will be more in the 2021 and 2022 budgets where you really get into those details, where you can make financial decisions on, if something was to cut an enormous amount of greenhouse gases, would you pay a little bit more for it and have those types of trade-off decisions? And now I'm going to pass it over to Steve for some other background information.
Thanks, Gord. So those that don't know me, I'm Steve Brown, the Director of Budget and Performance Services. So over the next several slides, we're going to take a look at some background information, including 2019 revenue and expense breakdown. Chatham-Kent has approximately 51,500 properties that pay property taxes. The largest portion of these properties fall under the residential and farm class, with the rest being a mix of both commercial and industrial properties. In 2019, Chatham-Kent received slightly over $327 million in revenue from a variety of sources. Property tax accounted for roughly 49% of the revenues at just over $160 million. Of the remaining 51%, both provincial and federal grants were a significant portion, making up 39% of Chatham-Kent's revenues. This includes items such as our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund and Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund grants. The remaining other revenue is comprised of such items as user fees, fines and penalties, permit fees, just to name a few. Of Chatham-Kent's overall expenses, 41.8% were employee-related. Expenses related to infrastructure, debt, and contracted out make up a significant portion. Contracted work is largely related to capital works, including the design and engineering of some of the larger capital projects within the municipality. So the slide shown here is information that Chatham-Kent inserts within the final tax bill. It outlines the departmental distribution of taxes on the average residential property. For example, in 2019, on a house assessed at $166,000, $526 of the approximately $2,900 tax bill went towards police services, and $375 went towards fire and emergency services. Since 2010, Chatham-Kent has made significant progress in lowering its debt. At the end of 2019, there was approximately $12 million of tax-funded debt outstanding, made up of social housing, the Convention Centre, Riverview Gardens, to name a few. If no new debt is issued, tax-funded debt will keep falling, and by 2032, there will be no tax-funded debt outstanding. So over the next several slides, we'll review some tax information, including a comparison to other communities, and describe what the difference is between tax policy and budget. So taking information from the BMA study that was presented to Council on Monday, the 2019 taxes on a modest 1,200 square foot home are approximately $297 lower in Chatham-Kent than the average of the 110 municipalities that participated in the study. While you often hear that the tax rates in Chatham-Kent are higher than many other areas, the assessment of properties in Chatham-Kent also tend to be lower. In order to be able to collect a similar value in taxes, the tax rates need to be higher in Chatham because of this lower assessment. Moving on to comparing a single-family detached home, the taxes paid in Chatham-Kent are below both the group and the survey average for a similar house within the other municipalities. And when you compare both the taxes and the water and wastewater costs, Chatham-Kent is below both the group and the survey average. Chatham-Kent has one of the lowest costs of services in the survey of 110 municipalities. We are, in fact, the 15th lowest. So Chatham-Kent's large size and geography present numerous challenges to the municipality and its overall budget. This slide highlights that many areas where Chatham-Kent is unique and the reasons why it's difficult to compare Chatham-Kent to any other municipality. While Chatham-Kent only has 0.7% of the Ontario population, we have over 20% of the municipal drains in Ontario and over 5% of the bridges. With only 43 people per square kilometre to pay for all of the infrastructure and the services, there are significantly less people to pay for those same services versus places such as Windsor and Sarnia. Because of our large geography, we must also maintain and staff 19 fire and 6 ambulance stations. So while I understand this slide can be pretty hard to read, what it does is it provides a breakout of the average residential assessment and taxes broken out between our pre-amalgamated communities. The average farm assessment and taxes broken out by ward is highlighted within the chart. As you will note, farms in and around Ward 6, which is Chatham, are assessed higher on average, with Ward 4, North Kent, having the second highest farm assessment in taxes. A 1% budget increase on commercial industrial properties equates to a tax increase of $97 and $89 respectively. A 1% increase impacts commercial industrial properties more than residential properties because they are taxed at roughly 2 times the rate of residential properties. In 2019, residential properties accounted for roughly 2/3 of the property taxes collected by the municipality. Commercial and industrial properties have remained consistent over 2018 levels at around 21%. Farm property taxes collected have been increasing in proportion to other taxes over the last 8 years because of the continuing increase in farm assessment values. And this slide's even harder to read, but what it does is it highlights the amount of taxes collected based on the property class within the pre-amalgamated communities. The budget process determines the total property taxes required, also known as the tax levy, while tax policy dictates how much is being collected from each property class. Or in other words, budget bakes the pie, tax policy slices the pie. Tax policy is presented to Council in April or May and provides Council with recommendations on tax ratio changes, which in turn may shift the proportion of the tax burden from one class to another. Tax policy also takes announcements from the province, such as the education rates, and new legislation, such as the tax ratio limits, in determining how that pie will be sliced. In recent years, municipalities in Essex County, along with the county itself, have been combining tax policy and budget setting. For example, Essex County announced a tax rate increase of 0.9% from their budget. The tax rate is multiplied by the assessment to determine how much you pay in property taxes. In all other communities, including Chatham-Kent, when the budget is discussed, we talk about tax levy. The tax levy is simply the amount the municipality will require for the entire year to provide services to its residents. To put Essex County's budget into context with Chatham-Kent's, the tax levy increase passed by Essex County was actually 6.5% before assessment growth. In order to determine what property class pays for what proportion of the tax levy, the assessment for each of the classes is multiplied by the tax ratio and then by the residential tax rate. In Chatham-Kent, multi-res, commercial, and industrial properties pay approximately twice the amount per dollar of assessment as residential properties pay. So looking at some other tax issues, in addition to the tax levy discussed tonight, there's also local improvement levies charged to some properties for works that are completed, such as drainage and waterworks. Some areas also have additional area rating for services that are provided to a specific area, but not all areas of Chatham-Kent. Looking at some additional 2020 budget information. During the 2020 budget, we have also had to address 2 recent cuts to the Ontario Municipal Partnership funding grants. After the passing of the 2019 budget, Chatham-Kent was notified that our 2019 grants would be reduced by $436,100. In late 2019, we were also notified that our 2020 grant would be reduced by a further $385,600. The overall impact that is required to be addressed during the 2020 budget amounts to $822,000. In 2019, not unlike 2018, Chatham-Kent had above average assessment growth that can be attributed directly to the completion of gateway casinos. In 2018, Chatham-Kent's assessment growth was higher than average because of the completion of the Enbridge Panhandle pipeline. Taking out these 2 one-off projects, our average assessment growth has been approximately $1.2 million annually.
Thanks, Steve, and I'll take the next few slides on infrastructure. So again, I know I've repeated this a couple times, but we have our asset management plan, approved recommendations from the 2017 asset management plan. And just a little history for those that weren't there, and the actual asset management plan actually recommended a 1.4% annual increase, but what was recommended and council approved was only adding 1% a year for the next 20 years, which means we still have a lot of work to do, as we have to find a 0.4% to be found through either divestments or efficiencies or new technologies that make assets last longer at cheaper overall costs. Also included in that plan was what to do as debt payments come off the book. So as Steve mentioned in a slide a few minutes ago, our debt is almost all disappeared from municipal taxes. We have about 10 million left, and it's being phased out over the next few years. The asset management plan in place council has already directed that those savings just automatically get transferred over to the asset management plan. So it was part of the plan that was approved by I guess another reason why we stayed only at 1% is because those were committed to the asset management plan. And we needed the third part of the asset management plan that needs to be emphasized. It only works if you fund inflation on assets as well. So in this year's budget proposal, we have the 1% of taxes is $1,551,000 this year. So we have our 1% recommended. We have a brand new item for infrastructure for the disaster mitigation and adaptation fund. We have year 204 of the council-directed storm sewer funding plan, and there was a little bit of a rounding on one of the grants that we received, so we're getting an additional $31,000. So we have infrastructure recommendations of $2,583,854 of new funding. On top of that, we have $775,000 available from one of the large debts that dropped off last year. So that will give a boost to infrastructure. And we do need to pay for inflation on infrastructure as well of the $1,673,000. So grand total, in this budget is an increase to infrastructure funding dollars of well over $5 million. This is the most that we've ever been able to put in a budget, but there's reasons for every penny of them, and frankly needs that go far beyond this. But it is a amazing accomplishment to be able to put $5 million into the budget. This is back to the 2017 asset management plan. It just shows major segments of where our assets are, and obviously road networks is about a third of it. Bridges was 20%. Sanitary and storm sewers, another 20%. So you take all those together, we're getting close to 3/4 of our assets are all in those categories, with the remaining ones making up the rest. This is a new graph this year, so I'm going to spend some time on it because it's trying to show things in two ways. So first we have the bars, and that's representing the millions needed for each of these major groups of assets. So for example, if I just look at paved roads, we need about $27 million a year in funding. We're currently around $13 million of funding. So we're just below 50%. And so on the right axis is percent funded, and that green dot there is just right around 50% for our paved roads. I think it might be 47 or 8. So, and the reason why we put this is to show how how much success this asset management has had in the last few years, and how we're well on our way on many of the categories. So if I was to just look at around 70% line, or maybe 65% and better, our bridges are getting close. Well, sorry. Yes, our bridges are getting close to 66 to that, almost 70%. As is our facilities, our capital budget, which was what was on Monday night, the $6.3 million capital budget. That's by default at 100%. Vehicles are funded highly, but you have to remember why we have decided to fund them highly is because there's a person in each one of those vehicles or a safety concern in each one of those vehicles, and poorly funding a police car, for example, there's never a good idea to have vehicles breaking down all the time. So we do heavily fund those. Our gravel roads, that's council's motions in last year's budget moved that to almost 100% funded. It was down around 75 to 80% prior to that. We're in pretty good shape for machinery, equipment, and housing services. Land improvements, you might wonder what that is. That's all your parkland and all the infrastructure in the parks. It's been one of the, I would say, it's been a little bit neglected because of other priorities, and it is time to get some funding to that. And these two categories, they're not 100% funded, but it's actually a very small amount of dollars to get them close to 80 or 90% funded. So we're really dealing with three issues: paved roads, the storm sewer network, and those park facilities. By focusing our attention, especially on the lowest one, the storm sewer one, to getting all those figures above 50% at least, will make huge improvements on what we're able to do as a municipality. And I think we can make it over 50% on all those categories during this term of council. These are just repeating the top 5 asset categories with deficits. The storm networks is currently over a $15 million deficit. Paved roads, about $14 million deficit. We've gone a long way on bridges. If over the last, let's say 6 years, we were well over 12% deficit on that column. Council put a focus on bridges of annual funding going to it, and we've been able to shrink that. And the majority of that lack of funding that's still there is on the small culverts that we are actually in pretty good shape now for the larger bridges. Then facilities and machinery to round out the top 5 deficits. Now I'm just going to look at overview of reserves. As was discussed in the BMA report on Monday as well, we do have about $165 million in reserves. 38 million of those are actually mandated for specific purposes. And then the life cycle and asset management plan has about $62 million in reserves that are often saved up for major projects. So when they, for example, in the community of Chatham, we know we have the 3rd Street Bridge project that's looming in the next, within the next 2 years. That's probably a $15 million bridge, or I'm just throwing a number out. $10 to $15 million or whatever that will be. So so often we're saving up for bigger projects, and that's across the board in all our life cycles. And then we have $66 million in reserves that have been assigned by council for specific purposes. It is within council's prerogatives to make changes to those past decisions, but that's where council has approved parking the funds for now for various purposes. And Don talked in detail about the staffing, so I'm not going through the detailed positions, but overall we have this 8 FTE. FTE is a full-time equivalent count, because you'll see in some of these there's 0.1s because there's some part-time employees and other things involved as well. But we have the 8 FTEs, but at a cost of $465,000 fully burdened costs with their that'll include their computer equipment or anything else that they would need as well. So basically, of those 8 jobs, there was about 4 that are landing on the tax base. The rest were funded from other sources. There are 4.7 jobs being recommended that are for short-term, more project-based, and there's recommendations in the budget to fund them from various reserves, so it actually will not have a tax impact, those. So we really just have the $465,000 of tax impact. Future years forecast, this will be hard to read at home, I believe, but we're always pretty conservative on future estimates, and I'm glad we are, because things come along, such as this year's provincial transfers. But we're also conservative on our assessment growth. So as Steve mentioned, we actually have had tremendous assessment growth for the last 2 years. But there's 2 major projects that are in there, and it just depends, well, are there major projects coming this year and the next and on going? So I've only projected the 0.8% assessment growth, which is around the $1.2 million a year. If we can surpass $2 million a year assessment growth, and you knock another 0.5% off these projections, that's really where we need to be headed, and to grow so that the current residents aren't forced with these high tax increases year after year. The other big question, of course, is what does the province does in the future, and with OMPF. We know where we are now. Actually, we say we're doing budgets all year round. Just for example, I had a conference call today on the 2021 OMPF with the Ministry of Finance this afternoon. And we have our future challenges. So we are in the 4% ranges, unless we have that good news of either, hopefully, that the province is done transferring cost to us, and hopefully that we can beat some of those assessment numbers, and so that we can consistently deliver a budget under 4%, 3.5 to 4, which is back to the inflation plus whatever you're paying for your asset management plan for infrastructure. Other budget information and next steps. So available on tonight, all the councillors have it in paper form in their binder, but all the information you see in your binder is also on the web tonight, except for this opening night presentation, which is being broadcast from your TV and will be replayable shortly in the next couple days. We are going out to the community meetings, so we will have in the future have the results of those community meetings and more feedback from citizens. The Police Services Board will be finalizing their presentation and will be presenting on Wednesday, January 29th. And we will have a closed presentation on employment and labor relations on Tuesday, the 28th, later in the evening. So our next steps, next week we're out for community consultation. On Tuesday the 21st, we're at Ryder Hall at the Tilbury Arena and Bruner Center in Thamesville from 4:30 to 6 with a planned presentation at approximately 5 o'clock each of those days. On Wednesday the 22nd, we're at the Blenheim High School cafeteria and the Wallsburg Municipal Office on the second floor there. And on Thursday the 23rd, we're at the Active Lifestyle Center at 20 Merritt in Chatham. We have council meetings, council committee meetings booked with you for January 28th, 29th, and 30th from 6 to 10 p.m. And then we can come back for February 4th and February 5th if necessary, all at the here in the council chambers. We will be welcoming public deputations each of those nights, and we'll have a sign-up sheet at the door as long as we appreciate advance notice of if you want to do deputation. They are similar to those council meetings. Those deputations are limited to 5 minutes. And that's it. We did ask advertise whether there was any deputations for tonight. There are none. And I turn it back to the budget chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on the presentation tonight? So that's not questions on items in the binder, just any items of clarity or any requests for information prior to the budget meetings. I don't see any questions. So just a reminder of the community meetings coming up next week. Following that, we'll be back here on January 28th to start budget deliberations. And in that time, I would encourage committee members, when you're going through your binder, if you have questions of clarity, if you need more information, let's try and get those requests off as soon as we can. I think we've, with some experience at budget, learned that that's the most efficient way of doing it, making sure we have all the information we need when we're trying to make those decisions. So I'd encourage you to reach out with any of those questions. So if there's no other questions or comments, we'll recess this meeting until 6 p.m. on January 28th, 2020. And as per the public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2020 budget immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. The Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during the budget deliberation processes as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Councillor McGrail, seconded by Councillor Hall. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Good night.